BTB TV is the home of cross.
Tim Johnson, welcome to Crosstalk.
Thank you.
So we do these shows, and a lot of people know, especially you, you're a big name in the sport of cyclocross, and people know your story over the last couple of years, but let's introduce people to Tim Johnson back in the day. Tell me about, 10-year-old Tim Johnson. Who were you?
That far back in the day.
Who were you? Where
That's
were
pretty
you?
far.
Yeah, and how did you find your way into sports and athletics?
Sports, I guess. I mean, I played soccer when I was in elementary school and middle school, high school. I rode a BMX bike. I had a paper route. I was always outside. I think I got into mountain biking because we were kind of outgrowing our BMX bikes and outgrowing our skateboards. And so my friends and I started riding in the woods, and then we'd use our mountain bikes to go party in the woods. And I was definitely not living a very straight and simple childhood, I guess. And I think that I just kind of got hooked with riding into the woods on a mountain bike.
Were you aware at the time of bike racing or professional cycling? Did you know anyone, or did you follow it at all?
The only real hook I had for bikes as that kind of thing was reading BMX Plus as a kid. My brother and I rode BMX a lot, so we had these magazines. And then we went to a freestyle show in North Conway, New Hampshire. The Haro team came. They were in the parking lot of the mall, and they had a quarter pipe that was on the back of their trailer. So it was like a van, trailer, quarter pipe, just like the movie Rad, which was a huge thing back then. And so these three guys would just do tricks, and one of them had a microphone. So two of them would do tricks while the third would talk in the mic. And it was Ron Wilkerson, Brian Blyther, and I can't remember who the third guy was. And
that was going to be you someday.
And so I got their autographs, and I brought this piece of paper home with all three autographs on there, and I stuck it up on my wall, and I had it on my wall for 4 or 5 years probably. And that was a real connection to what I saw in the movies, or the movie Rad. Mm-hmm. And I didn't realize it was a job probably until, I don't know, maybe 16, 17, when I went to Mount Snow to do the mountain bike races up there. So the World Cup.
Right. And
one of the Mahoney brothers, out of their local guys, they're actually the guys that got me into mountain biking. They rode Miata bikes, and I rode a Miata bike through our bike shop. And so we got to know Greg Erbold. And so Greg would be at the truck, and so we would camp, and we'd hang out, and we'd do our thing, we'd ride, and we'd go to the expo area, and there would be this Miata trailer, and there would be Greg working on his bike and downhill, whatever. And so he was always super friendly and nice, and I'd be the little ratty kid on the outside of the tent walls, kind of like, hey Greg, what are you doing? And he'd tell me that, he's trying out a new tire, or he just broke something or whatever. And he was really like DIY all the time. I mean, the guy was just always working on stuff, but he was a guy in a magazine. So I'm looking at this person who was also in a magazine who I could talk to, and I figured out that this is what he did. He would go to races and do this. So I guess that's kind of the first inclination I had that you could have a job as a bike racer.
So then jump ahead to where you start racing. You have a lot of success at a pretty young age on the road and cyclocross. But a lot of people have success as a junior in a U23, and they're still not doing it as a career or making the decision. I mean, a lot of people stop around that time. At what point did you realize that this was going to be what you pursued as your career, not just something you tried to do as long as you could? Or
yeah, I mean, there was a change from doing it as a hobby, because I didn't have a ton of success. I mean, as a junior, I'd be able to win a junior mountain bike race. I didn't really do any road yet. I got into cross, and I'd be able to win a junior cross race, but not all the time. It would be once in a while. I raced mountain bikes into 19, 20, 21. I went to college, so I went to Lindsey Wilson College on a mountain bike scholarship. So I'd race collegiately, and then the following year, I wanted to race mountain bikes. I wanted to be a pro mountain biker. That was originally what I wanted to do the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I raced the circuit. I did 3 or 4 of the weekends and in Park City and out west and everything. And I got crushed. I mean, I was getting destroyed at these races because I would do well in New England on a semi-flat, rooty, rocky, single-track mountain bike race. Then I'd go to these ski areas with 20-minute climbs, and I'd get destroyed. Because I was riding 3-4 days a week max. I was more of a pretender than anything. And it, really, that probably saved me because I was such a late bloomer. I mean, I hit 100 pounds in 10th grade. I hit 5 feet in 10th grade. Like, I was not this great junior who had his stuff together. It took me a long time to figure it out. But I think that when going into the year 2000 was really the year that I figured out how to do this if I wanted to do it. I sat down with my mentor and manager, Steve Pucci, and he's like, "Kid, what are you doing? You want to do this?" And I was like, "Well, I think so." He's like, "Well, if you think you're doing it, you're not. Like, you're riding, you're participating, but you're not doing it. This is not, if you're going to do this and make a career out of it, you have to actually take it seriously." And I guess up until that point, I thought I was taking it seriously, but I wasn't. I was just kind of a young little punk and didn't really get it. But so we made a plan. We made a plan to try and do well at these races that we thought could get me seen by a road team or someone that might be able to open doors or somehow like find that hook where I could get a job, turn pro.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was Road Nationals. It was Univest Grand Prix. It was in some of the local races. Like, I had to be able to train to win to get a job. Yeah. And up until then, I just thought that if you wanted to be a bike racer, you could be a bike racer, which actually is kind of the case in a lot of ways. There are a lot of people who race bikes who think they're doing it as a profession, but they're not. I think that if you sign a professional contract, you get money, you get income, and that's your sole source of income is from cycling when you're a professional. Up until then, I think it's fine to do, to race full time or to travel full time and do all these things, but it's not really a job until that's your sole source of income. And up until then, it wasn't.
So mountain biking doesn't work out, cyclocross is there, road racing, especially at the time that you were trying to turn pro in the 2000s, and I mean, that's the Lance era, and road racing's huge in the
Mm-hmm.
U.S. We know where you ended up now, but at the time, as you started to get, you made a lot of progress from obviously that first conversation, and you made it to Europe. What did you think, or what was your goal for yourself at the time? I mean, did you want to be a Grand Tour rider, and how did you work your way through that crazy situation that was early 2000s road racing to end up ultimately as a cyclocross guy?
I dreamt of racing in the Tour. Like, I remember 97, 98, my friend Phil and I, we'd be watching the Tour at like 1 o'clock in the morning. We'd stay up late and watch the highlights from that day's stage, or the Saturdays would be the 2.5 hour recap. And I always wanted to race in the Tour. That was definitely a dream of mine. Even when I wasn't a road racer, I mean, I was still a mountain biker, and I'd watch this and be like, "Man, that's so awesome! It's crazy to be a part of that." And when I was racing more often in 2000 or 99, 2000, I had already won nationals as a junior, as an under 23. I had, I'd been able to race locally and get in the breaks and get on the podium, whatever. And then going into 2001, I was able to go top 10 at Killington, which was one of the biggest stage races we had. I met Frank and Mark from racing. So Frankie was my coach, and he basically said, if you want to be a bike racer, you have to train. And up until then, I wasn't really training. So then all of a sudden, here I am, like, beating myself up to ride and train. But getting on the Saturn team and doing a stage race and having this thing where you do the stage, you do your best, you work for your team, whatever, and then you wake up in the morning and do it all over again, that was like the coolest feeling ever, because you wake up and all you have to do is ride your bike, and then you go to bed and you wake up and all you have to do is ride your bike. And I actually had a lot of success early on. I mean, right away I got the KOM jersey at Toro Willamette, my first pro stage race, and I look back at that thing, we had tons and tons of climbing. Like, I had been able to do the Mount Washington Hill climb and win that. And that was like, I started to see that I could actually do this, you know? And there were no jobs mountain biking, even though I loved mountain biking. I was doing cross in the off season, and even all the way through Saturn, we still paid for all of our own travel. It wasn't a subsidized part of the season. Like, we were doing cross on our own.
For cyclocross.
So me, Frank, Mark, Bart Bowen for a while, we traveled all these races on our own. We paid for everything. The team didn't really do much for us. They barely supported us. But we did it because we loved it. So at the time, there was no possible way to be a professional cross racer. Like, there weren't any.
In North America.
In North America, yeah.
I mean, knowing now how well you have done in cyclocross over the last, however long it's been, or 8 or 9 years since you've
It's been a while, actually.
since you really
just
started
thinking about it.
Yeah, since you started focusing on cross. I mean, like you said, you had great success on the road, but I think you could argue. I mean, certainly you'll be remembered, I think, as a cyclocross rider, at least in North America. If you could go back and do it again, would you have done anything differently to focus more on cross earlier, or go to Europe, or did you have to go through that road career to be able to have done what you've done in cross?
At the time, I had to go through the road because there were no other ways to make a living.
Because you were on the podium at the World Championships for cyclocross was it your last year, U23?
Yeah,
So
1999.
were there European teams that was there
So the
any
following
option?
year, I rode for Bart Wellens' team.
Right.
So we raced. I got the medal in February '99.
Mm-hmm.
The following fall, I went to Belgium and lived there for the whole fall. So I lived with Bart and his potential father-in-law, Hans van Kessler, who runs the Fedea team now. Fedea, actually, they just started the team that year. But I was racing amateur with Bart on his team because he was still under 23. And I learned a lot about what the sport really was. So here I would do Fort Devens, a big local race, and then Fort Devens the Super Cup. You know, we did Philadelphia, we did San Jose. Like, so those are U.S. versions of European cross.
Mm-hmm.
So with Bart, I remember pulling into the Koppenberg and not having any clue as to what we were getting into, and get out of the van and I'd be like, holy shit, I mean, it's the side of a mountain and it's a cobbled road that's perfectly straight all the way up, and this is before it was redone. And at that time, that race would go straight up the cobbles and then twist around and then go all the way back down. Right. And I mean, just out of this world hard. I mean, crazy courses. The UCI rules weren't really rules then. It was like skinny, it was wide, it was muddy, it was uphill, downhill, whatever. It totally exposed me to all these different things. I mean, and actually, one of the best things that it did was expose me to the business side of the sport. So I learned what it meant to have a sponsor that would pay into something, and then you hopefully give them back their exposure, whatever, start money, paying taxes. Like, I learned a lot. I ticked off a lot of boxes that year because for Bart, those were just expected steps in his career. Mm. But for me, I went from winning a medal and $50 at a local cross race to getting start money and paying an agent fee and and traveling and you know, paying for the gas in the Sprinter van.
Yeah.
I had never done that. I mean, I drove to the race in my car and took my bike out and raced and then drove home. And here it was, we were actually like functioning as a team. I remember like the day that we filled up the water tank for the first time in the Sprinter van. We had like this 150-gallon water tank in the base of the Sprinter van because we had a Karcher power washer, and Bart's like, yeah, but we have to go here to fill up the water, because he didn't do it at his house because it was too expensive. So we went somewhere else and then filled up this tank. And I mean, it made me step back from what the racing was and saw all these other things that have to go into the racing, which really I think helped me when I did turn professional to realize that it's not just you on your bike racing. There's a whole team of people all the time, and if they don't know exactly what they're doing, they're all part of getting you somewhere. So it's not, it stopped it from being an individual effort and made it much wider, I think.
Thank you for joining us today. You guys tune back in probably tomorrow or sometime soon, and we will have part 2. We're going to talk about the last couple of years. We're going to talk about nationals coming up, and next year. Will there be a next year? You guys find out next time.